But in fact, your most recent work is Handful of Dust, wasn't it?
Yes, that you've seen.
At 73, Anjelica Huston no longer speaks like an actress. She speaks like a survivor. Her voice, once measured and elegant, now carries the weight of someone who has lived too long inside someone else's storm. In a rare interview, she is asked about Jack Nicholson, the man who defined a generation, and for 17 years, defined her life. She smiles, not out of fondness, but recognition. I loved him, she says quietly, but he broke something in me that never healed. The silence that follows is heavier than any confession. For decades, Hollywood adored their story, the magnetic actress and the brilliant madman, the golden couple of chaos and charisma. Their photos captured laughter, beauty, excess. No one ever saw the loneliness hiding in her eyes. Jack was the sun, bright, impossible to approach, burning everything too close. Anjelica was the moon, reflecting his light, waiting for her own dawn that never came. Together, they danced through the 70s and 80s through Oscars, scandals, and endless nights of champagne and silence. But behind every dazzling appearance was a woman learning to breathe in the thin air of his universe. When she finally began to speak, it wasn't to accuse or to forgive. It was to remember and to reclaim herself. People think love is about devotion, she said. But sometimes, love is about survival. That sentence changes everything. Because in Hollywood, survival isn't romantic. It's rare. Especially when the man you love is Jack Nicholson, a genius, a legend, and a storm no one could control. What does it mean to love a man who consumes everything, including you? And what remains of a woman who survives him? Before he became Hollywood's eternal rebel, Jack Nicholson was a boy from Neptune, New Jersey, a place as unglamorous as its name. Raised by women, surrounded by secrecy. He didn't learn the truth about his own mother until he was almost 40. His life began in confusion, and from it he built a career that glorified chaos. To him, unpredictability wasn't danger. It was power. By the time Anjelica Huston met him, he was already a myth in motion, the wild grin from Easy Rider, the mad prophet of 5 easy pieces, the devil with charm and cigarette smoke curling around his eyes. Women adored him. Men wanted to be him. Hollywood revolved around him like planets caught in his gravity. Anjelica, by contrast, had inherited a quieter kingdom. Daughter of the legendary director John Huston and ballerina Enrica Soma, she grew up between Ireland and California, in homes filled with art, cruelty, and genius. She understood talent. She also understood loneliness. When she entered Jack's orbit in 1973, she wasn't naive, she was drawn. He was dangerous, she later admitted. And I liked that. Their relationship was never built on stability. It was built on fascination. She admired his brilliance, the way he could command a room with a joke or a glance. He admired her resilience, the calm, tall woman who never tried to tame him. But love, in Jack Nicholson's world, came with a cost. Fidelity was an idea, not a rule. At first, she pretended not to see. Hollywood trained women to smile through humiliation, to turn pain into poise. Anjelica did both with effortless grace. She accompanied him to award shows, laughed at his jokes, posed for photographs that made them look eternal. But each time, the flash faded. She returned to the same silence, a phone that rang only when he needed comfort, a life suspended between hope and humiliation. Friends tried to warn her, "You can't change him." One said, She answered with quiet defiance, "I am not trying to." Deep down, she believed love could civilize him, that her strength could hold his madness. But genius doesn't want to be saved, it only wants to be understood. Jack loved her in his own way intensely, inconsistently. He once sent flowers after a fight that filled her living room like a jungle. The note simply read, "Sorry, baby. I was thinking too much." It was the kind of gesture that made her forgive, even when she shouldn't. Because when Jack apologized, it wasn't a plea. It was a performance. For 17 years, they lived on the edge of devotion and destruction. He disappeared for weeks, then returned with gifts and stories that sounded like dreams. She waited, not because she was weak, but because she believed endurance was love. Every woman who ever loved a genius learns the same lesson. To love him is to share the stage, but never the spotlight. In 1974, he starred in Chinatown, the film that defined him. Ironically, it also mirrored their relationship, a world of charm built over secrets, corruption, and unspoken wounds. During filming, Anjelica would visit the set, watching him become Jake Gittes, elegant, haunted, untouchable. It was hard to tell where Jack ended and the character began. Sometimes, she wondered if there was any difference. Through the late 70s and 80s, the parties grew louder, the nights longer, the betrayals more public. Jack flirted shamelessly, often in front of her, as if fidelity were a joke everyone was in on. When the tabloids published photos of him with other women, she refused to comment. Her silence became her dignity. But silence is heavy. It leaves bruises no one can see. Yet amid the chaos, there were moments of tenderness. He called her Tuffy, half mockery, half admiration. She called him the king of crazy. They laughed. They fought. They made up. He once told her, "You're the only person I've ever met who looks good angry." And she, without smiling, replied, "Then you must love me most of all." But love didn't protect her. It only prolonged the storm. Behind the gates of Mulholland Drive, in the house filled with art, scripts, and ashtrays, she often woke to an empty bed. He was out somewhere filming, flirting, or escaping. She lit a cigarette, looked at the city below, and whispered to herself, "This is what loving a legend feels like." What kept her there wasn't blindness. It was courage, or perhaps the illusion of it. To leave would mean to start again, to admit that 17 years had been spent chasing a ghost. To stay meant losing pieces of herself. Slowly, quietly, she chose to stay, for a time, because she wasn't ready to live without the chaos that had become her oxygen. Hollywood adored their image, the wild genius and the woman who could match his fire. But fame loves myths more than people. Beneath the photographs, two souls were drifting apart, tied together by memory and exhaustion. And then came the moment that changed everything, when Anjelica discovered the secret that made her finally walk away. The call came on an ordinary afternoon, no drama, no warning. A friend told Anjelica that Jack had fathered a child with another woman, a young model. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She just listened, cigarette trembling slightly between her fingers. In that instant, 17 years of patience, passion, and denial collapsed into silence. She wasn't surprised. She was humiliated. That night, when Jack came home, she didn't ask for an explanation. She didn't cry, either. She simply looked at him, her face unreadable. "Is it true?" she asked. His answer, casual, almost lazy, cut deeper than any scream. "Yeah, Baby, he said. It just happened. It just happened. Those 3 words became the echo that haunted her for years. They reduced love to an accident, betrayal to coincidence, her heartbreak to a footnote in someone else's story. In that moment, she realized what she had always known. She had been living in his movie, not her own. For weeks, she tried to carry on. She went to work, smiled at photographers, posed beside him at events as if nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. She described it later as living underwater. The light still reached her, but faintly, distorted. Every sound was muffled, every breath an effort. Anjelica had grown up in a world of grand men, her father, her lovers, her directors, men who believed emotion was weakness. She had learned to survive by turning pain into elegance. Yet this time, grace wasn't enough. She began to write, to paint, to walk through her empty house like a ghost searching for meaning. The woman who once defined herself through others began, for the first time, to define herself through solitude. Jack didn't understand. He never did. For him, remorse was temporary, like a hangover after a long night. He would show up with flowers, or whisper something funny, and expect the world to reset. But something inside her had shifted. She wasn't angry, not yet. She was awake. Her friends noticed the change. "You're quieter now." One said, "No," she replied. "I am just done explaining." Still, leaving him wasn't simple. Love, even when broken, still pulls like gravity. There were nights when she missed the chaos, the laughter, the absurdity, the danger of being near a man who didn't know limits. She remembered their road trips up the California coast, his hand on the wheel, his eyes full of mischief. He could make her laugh until her ribs hurt. He could make her feel like the only person in the world and then vanish the next day. That contradiction was his art. In the years that followed, Anjelica turned inward. She took roles that mirrored her reality, women of strength, mystery, pain. In Prizzy's Honor, directed by her father, she played a mafia daughter who must kill the man she loves. The irony was brutal. The performance earned her an Oscar, her first moment of triumph without Jack. When she accepted the award, she didn't thank him. But everyone knew the performance was written in the language of her heartbreak. She later said that filming that role felt like exorcising a ghost. The ghost was love, the kind that consumes rather than comforts. After her Oscar win, Jack called. "You were magnificent," he told her. His voice was warm, proud, familiar. For a second, she almost softened. Then she remembered the years of waiting, of forgiving, of disappearing into someone else's legend. She said, gently but firmly, "Thank you, Jack. I am doing fine on my own." That sentence, simple, final, was her freedom. But freedom comes with loneliness. In the quiet after the storm, she confronted the truth she had long avoided. She had loved him not because he was good for her, but because he reflected the chaos she carried inside. Jack was the mirror to her father, brilliant, unpredictable, unfaithful. Loving him had been her way of trying to heal an old wound, the wound of growing up in the shadow of men who were larger than life but smaller in love. Once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. In her memoir, Watch Me, Anjelica wrote, "Jack was impossible, but so was my need for him." She admitted that for years she mistook intensity for intimacy, pain for proof of passion. We confuse drama with depth. She reflected, because stillness scares us. Hollywood adored her revelation, calling it poetic. But it wasn't poetry. It was survival. By her early 50s, Anjelica had rebuilt her world. She married sculptor Robert Graham, a man whose silence was peaceful, not punishing. With Robert, she said, I could finally rest. But even in that peace, the shadow of Jack lingered not as regret, but as a reminder of who she used to be. Sometimes, late at night, shed, think of the old days, the cigarette smoke curling between them, the laughter echoing off the walls, the nights that ended in tears and apologies. She didn't miss him. She missed the intensity of feeling alive, even when it hurt. That's what love with Jack Nicholson had been, a fire that burned everything, including the fear of living. One afternoon, decades later, she found a photograph of them together, young, smiling, unbroken. She looked at it for a long time. In that photo, she saw both innocence and illusion. She placed it back in the drawer and whispered, "Thank you. Not for the love, not for the pain, but for the awakening." Because in surviving him, she had discovered something far more precious than romance identity. The woman who once waited by the phone now spoke her truth without trembling. The actress who had lived in his chaos had turned her scars into art. Jack Nicholson gave her everything and took just as much away. Yet in the strange arithmetic of love, the loss became her inheritance. It made her stronger, sharper, more herself. And though she would never say she forgave him, she once said something even more honest. I understand him now. And understanding is its own kind of peace. Years after their separation, Hollywood assumed their story was over. Jack went on to become a legend. Anjelica became a woman of mythic strength. They no longer shared red carpets or headlines. What no one knew was that, quietly, their lives kept intersecting through letters never sent, friends they still shared, and memories neither could quite bury. The biggest shock did not come from betrayal. It came from truth. When Robert Graham, Anjelica's husband, passed away in 2008, she received a handwritten note delivered by an assistant. The handwriting was unmistakable, bold, impatient, familiar. It was from Jack. Tuffy, it began, using the nickname only he could say without irony. I heard about Robert. I don't have the right to say much, but I want you to know I've missed you in ways ill never admit out loud. There was no apology. There never was. But between the lines lived something closer to surrender, a rare crack in the armor of a man who had spent his life hiding vulnerability behind charm. Anjelica read the letter once, twice, then folded it carefully and placed it inside a drawer. She didn't reply. Some silences are sacred. In interviews years later, she would mention it only indirectly. People assume I stopped loving him. I didn't. I just stopped needing him. That sentence revealed what decades of gossip never could: that love doesn't die with distance. It simply changes shape. What she had lost in him, she had reclaimed in herself. For Jack, the realization came too late. Friends say he often spoke of her, not with regret but with nostalgia, as if she were the last person who ever saw him clearly. Anjelica, he once said, was the only woman who stayed long enough to really know what I am. When he turned 70, a journalist asked if he believed in love. Jack laughed the same laugh that once seduced the world, but then his expression changed. Love, he said, sure, I've met it. But I was too wild to keep it. Behind the bravado, there was something fragile, the weight of a man who realized that chaos, once celebrated, eventually becomes loneliness. The irony of their story is cruel and beautiful. The woman who suffered his storms found peace, and the man who caused them ended up standing alone in the quiet. Anjelica later reflected, "There was a time when I thought surviving him meant forgetting him. Now I know it meant forgiving myself for staying, for hoping, for believing in a man who couldn't love the way I needed." The revelation wasn't about Jack's cruelty. It was about her awakening. In the mythology of Hollywood, men like Jack are immortal, their flaws romanticized, their damage forgiven. But Anjelica's truth challenged that myth. She refused to be the tragic muse or the bitter ex-lover. Instead, she became something far rarer, the woman who looked back at the fire, smiled, and walked away unburned. Once, at an awards ceremony decades later, their paths crossed briefly. He approached her, older, slower, but still with that mischievous glint. "You still mad at me, Tuffy?" he teased. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not the god of her youth, but a man shaped by his own emptiness. "No, Jack," she said softly. "I am not mad. I am just done." It wasn't cruelty. It was closure. He laughed, but his eyes shimmered with something that looked suspiciously like pain. And for the first time, she felt no sadness, no longing, only gratitude. Gratitude for having survived him, for having reclaimed her life from his chaos. That was the real revelation, that strength isn't loud, and closure doesn't come with revenge. It comes quietly the day you stop needing to be understood. Jack Nicholson and Anjelica Huston's story is often told as a Hollywood tragedy. But perhaps it was something else, a lesson written in stardust and smoke that love, no matter how destructive, leaves behind the truth we spend our lives searching for. When asked years later if she still thought of him, Anjelica smiled faintly. "Sometimes," she said, "but only with light." In the end, there was no grand reconciliation, no dramatic reunion to satisfy Hollywood's appetite for closure. What remained was quieter, purer two lives that had collided like comets and left behind a trail of light and wreckage. Anjelica Huston did not become the woman broken by love. She became the woman defined by endurance. Her story was never about Jack Nicholson's chaos. It was about what she built after surviving it. She turned pain into art, confusion into clarity, silence into wisdom. In her later years, she spoke of him with neither resentment nor nostalgia. "We were young," she said once. "We did the best we could with what we had. But love isn't supposed to erase you." Those words became her quiet manifesto, a declaration that strength isn't found in leaving or staying, but in finally recognizing yourself in the mirror again. Jack, for all his brilliance, remained a man chasing ghosts of youth, of fame, of a kind of love he could never sustain. His legend endures. But legends, by nature, are lonely things. Anjelica's truth, however, is human, messy, raw, luminous. And that is why her story outlived the scandal. When she looks back now, she doesn't see tragedy. She sees a kind of education. "He taught me how deep the ocean can be," she once said, "and how strong you have to be to swim out of it." That is the moral at the heart of this story. Loving a genius means walking through fire, but survival is its own form of grace. The world remembers Jack Nicholson as the eternal rebel, the cinematic devil who never bowed to rules. But somewhere in his long shadow stands a woman who didn't just endure him, she transcended him. Because in every great love story, there is one who burns and one who learns. And sometimes, the one who walks away carries the truest light. As the credits of their shared past fade, only one truth remains. The storm made her stronger. and the silence that followed became her peace.